Meeting to order. Special counsel, please call the roll.
Director Howard.
Here.
Director Duplessis. Present. Director Pacia. Director Taylor. Director Schulis.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay. Now we'll proceed with presentation item. Presentation item day is contract change order process. We're following up on concerns from the board meeting where the board is asked to approve changes on a routine basis, some of which are large. And we want to make sure two things. One, of course, we're in legal compliance. I assume that goes without saying. And two, that we're engaging in best practices and following procedures that maximize the bang for the buck for the Sewage and Water Board and its contracting. So Kassan and Chris Bergeron is going to, the engineering division manager will provide a presentation on the change order process.
Wonderful. Well, good morning again, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk about change order, which is a kind of generic term, and we're going to go through some nuances associated with that term and what it means and where it's applied and what's not. And I think this is a topic that brings somewhat of a concern or uncomfortableness to many who are involved. So we appreciate where you're coming from. We're very confident that our process is very solid, and obviously, like you said, it goes without saying, it's legal. We do want to bring more comfort to you, obviously, because you are involved. You're the final authority, and we're obviously looking for ways to allow you to be more engaged and involved as early in the process as you desire, obviously, without there's a line that you draw allowing us to do our job and then bring you final products for approval. So like you said, Chris Bergeron and I will be tag teaming. He'll take part of the presentation. He's a mechanical engineer, has been with us for a long time, and he's been handling one of the most complex projects that we've touched. So he brings hands-on experience. He struggles through the process. He's proud of what he's done. We're proud of what he's done for us. And so we think we have good people on the table. Obviously, Ron is here to answer any questions that you may have outside the presentation. And obviously, our CFO is very instrumental in keeping us in check and keeping the budget and everything in the process. So with that, we'll start with the first slide. It's kind of a large overview of, I'm leading with I'm a delegator. So So again, the first thing we'd like to do is maybe go over the types of contracts that any public agency, obviously we're in the public realm. This has nothing to do with the private sector, which some of you may be more familiar with. So this is what a typical public agency would go through or would adhere to, and it changes from one state to another, but it's very universal, to be honest with you, and there's nothing that unique about the state. So you have public works type contracts, which basically covers construction and improvements, mostly physical work that takes place in the public arena. And that obviously there's guidance that allows that. So typically, this is what happens anytime we have a construction project. We go through the public works contracting process. When it comes to professional services, that is a totally different type of contract and different type of procurement and process of procuring a service for that need. And obviously, there's always the goods and material and non-professional contracting that we engage in. All different threshold, all different rules, and I assure you, with our special counsel and her team, we dot every I and we cross every T. And we have a procurement office that is independent, and they run the procurement process for us, again, independently, and they have a lot of safeguards against any deviation that we may encounter. So, any questions on that?
Where did JIRR fit in?
So that would be public works because it's construction. And in this case, JRR is a contract that the city procures. So they are the contracting agencies, and they contract our work, and that's folded into their contract. Even though we have agreements and we have our own construction management of our pieces, but they are the contracting agency. And then we pay them for the work that they do on our behalf. So, and we'll talk a little bit about JRR throughout the process. So types of, we call them contract mods or contract modifications. Each, again, this is a universal world, nothing too unique for us, but when it comes to a construction project that is typically low bid, you know, and for a conventional project delivery, you know, you have a design, bid, and build. That's the 99% of our work goes that route. And if there's any changes that they would create a need for a change order, that typically is in the construction or public works contracts. So that's kind of, so when you use the term change orders, you know you're talking about public works. When it comes to professional services, the actual term is amendment, contract amendment. And when you say that, people know you're talking about professional. So they're, you know, separated. You wouldn't have amendment associated with construction. And often use the term contract renewal when it comes to goods and materials and maintenance. Not always, but I would say more often than not. So in some cases, you may have a construction project that was bid out through a low bid process or procured throughout low bid process, such as like point repair, which you've approved. Those may have built-in extensions, allowable extensions, and often the renewals are designed. So typically you have like a 3-year contract for something with a 5 1-year term extension that's mutually agreed to. So,
But don't we call that a change order sometimes? I feel certain we have had renewals that were called change orders.
it's under the umbrella, I guess, of a change order, but it's a contract renewal. I mean, again, it's very standard. It's folded under a change order, but it's an actual allowable. I mean, I know we struggle with the term. It's not necessarily a change, so to speak, right? It's a process. It's contemplated, it's thought out, and it's being executed as planned. But because the original contract is signed for a certain amount and for a certain term, any deviation, even though contemplated, is considered a change. I know it's a struggle, but it brings more.
It's the implication that disturbs me. But I'm not even honest.
Yeah, from a perspective, yes, I mean, I understand, but it's all, if there's a way to change the term.
Yeah, quick thing is, I see where POCO is going because I do most of the renewals, but the base contract itself is a base contract, and those 2 renewals are indicated in that base contract. The renewals are at the option and approval of the board, but to answer your question, Mr. Sloss, is that it's a base contract, and that contract also indicates there are 2 optional renewal periods at the approval of the board, and then that's where that contract renewal will come in. We will bring that renewal in that's not in that change order change, but hopefully that answers your question.
It's disclosed in the bid, so it's not only in the contract, but in the bidding process, it would say that much.
That's correct.
So it's expected.
I don't want to belabor this any more than I already have. It's not what's going on that I'm talking about. It's that we have,
The terminology.
maybe I'd lose a bet, but I would bet that we have called renewals change orders. And I think that change order implies something that wasn't planned as opposed to a renewal, which I would call an option, whatever, a renewal, or an extension or whatever. Anyway, that's.
Well, if there's a way to change the terminology.
The change order is when there's been either an increase in the amount of the contract due to, like you said, unforeseen circumstances. Oftentimes the change orders that do come before the board, the contract is actually let out with the public works at a certain amount. But oftentimes engineering has said that we need a change order because they're out in the field and there's been some type of unknown circumstances. That means that
Not as drawn and stuff. I get that.
Yeah, what POCO is concerned about is that it's a designed, anticipated addition. It's allowable, but why are we calling it change is predicated on the fact that we have a base bid. That's what we procured the contract for, and now we're extending time. So it's semantics.
I'm the only one who cares about it.
We could have I think it would be helpful to break these things out. So it would just be a question of having a motion to approve a category
renewal.
called renewals, rather than to put those under change orders. Is that what you're suggesting?
In the old days, you know, the old days.
That is the practice, renewals, renewals, that's correct.
So for the record, I'd like to note that Director Taylor is here, and also that we have a guest with us for Director Sloss. He's not on this committee, but thank you, Dr. Sloss, Director Sloss.
Any other questions on this slide?
I think you mentioned this, but in the light of the discussion, I got kind of lost a little bit. So contract renewals can be for construction, public works, as well as professional services, right? Can we contract renew if it's built into the original contract?
They're normally for public works, construction contracts, goods and service maintenance contracts, and that would be specified within that base contract itself.
Got it.
So the professional services are always an amendment.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And again, it's 99% of the time it's contemplated, it's designed. It allows the luxury of enjoying good contract, good delivery, good product, and
And
then we can
continuing the good work.
right.
That comes up, yes.
So we're going to go through some of the reasons why we have, what causes a change order to happen. And we can spend hours really talking about this, but basically, again, from Chris's and Ron's experience, often a change order is created because of unforeseen conditions. Okay, it's not known, and to avoid situations or to minimize these unforeseen situations, you can spend a lot of time in advance exploring, investigating, in some cases excavating to validate a location of a certain power line or a water main, but that costs a lot of money and a lot of time. And it's not a very typical process or approach. So it's often you rely on documented plans. You ask for other utilities and whoever may happen to have utilities underground for their updated or up-to-date information, and you superimpose it on one plan, and you use that as a mean to bid it out, and the contractor looks at it and they know how to bid their project based on the seen or known at this given time scenario or conditions. And so once you start opening things up, especially in our city, things, just kind of create a lot of issues. So at times, change orders allow us to end up with a better product than design because of some things that we may see and say, we're going to change this. And because there's some additional information in front of us now that we didn't have before, and it would be irresponsible not to take advantage of that opportunity. So you take that and you initiate a change order that obviously typically costs more money, but sometimes change orders end up saving you money. So if you encounter a situation where you say, instead of putting two bends here, maybe one bend can satisfy us and have us end up with the same result, then we can deduct the cost of that additional bend and save money. Typically, we don't bring those to you because there's cost savings. Errors and omissions is always a challenging situation if we have either our own engineers or outsourced engineers design something and they missed something. They omitted to do some exploratory work and drew a line the wrong place, whatever the case may be. That may cause a change order, and it happens. And if it's clear cut and easy to prove, we would go to after the professional service provider and ask for at minimum pay for that additional cost. A very tough place to be, but we can and would do it. And then there's other kind of unique situations here and there that would create opportunity for a change order. This is the same. This is specific for construction. Obviously, it's again predicated on change of conditions. When it comes to, and it's not on the slide, the contract amendments, it's typically, obviously, like we said, it's associated with professional services, and often, more often than not, it's more adding scope or reacting to something that's happened in construction. So let's say we discover something in the way, now we have to go back to the designer and say, hey, we need you to reroute this water main. That obviously would add cost to the work. If we bring him on as a construction management partner that wasn't contemplated before, that increased cost for the professional service contract.
Gaston, what do you think the breakdown is of percentages of causes of change orders?
I would say predominantly the first one, unforeseen conditions. No doubt.
What was your answer?
Unforeseen conditions is predominantly the predominant
And
cause.
do you expect that to be like 20%, 15%, 30%? Like what is the, I don't have a good sense on what is a typical number of change orders that seems reasonable versus like, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I'll let you-
So I would say the predominant cost is going to be your unforeseen conditions, because those are going to be your most expensive ones. If you see a change order for $600-800 million, those are usually going to be because of that. While we may have more, like a number of requests that we may make changes to, generally those are going to be much smaller in magnitude. Just for
But industry standards, I mean, in my experience, I would say, if you stay within 10% within your original cost, you're doing well.
So that's not the number of change orders, that's the total cost of
Total
change
cost.
orders.
Right.
Yes. So 10%, when you close a contract and it's costing you 10% more than the original bid, I think generally speaking, you're doing well.
So when I redid my kitchen, I did not do well. My change orders were not within 10% of the cost.
No comment.
So as an approving body, and we start to see things creep up beyond 10%, 20, 30, 40, how do we handle those?
Well, you look at it and is it justified? What led to this number, right? And we have an example today of the C7, C8,
That's
right?
correct.
I mean, the percentage well exceeded the 10%, but you have to look at overall performance. Are we doing 10% or less on most of them? The answer is yes. There are some specifics or nuances associated with one particular project, and if it's justified, it could be 50%. And you have to always look at, could you have done more work in advance and spend more money for more clarity, better conditions, accurate reflection, sure, but that would have been reflected in the cost of the original bid, right? In counting water intrusion, right? If you had that component in the bid itself, then the number would have been there anyway. There's always argument and a little bit uncomfortableness about, well, being bid out is different than negotiated, and I guarantee you that. I mean, I agree with that. But again, how much time and money you would have to spend on the prep design, and you have also interject the funding that was happening and the timing and how important it was for us to start that project, a couple of years ago, where we wanted to be at a point of no return. We could have spent maybe another year designing, arguably, and we would have had maybe cleaner or less change orders, but then the cost would have been very, very close to what we ended up paying,
And I
if
think
that
the
makes
goal
sense.
we would be looking for is cost control. Like, how can we better control
Right.
for the costs, as opposed to finding a situation where we have just ballooning costs and we have no control? Because it's going to be very rare that this committee says no, right? It
The committee does what?
says no, right? So I think the onus is for us to figure out how do we control the cost as much as we can, so that we have an idea of what these projects are going to ultimately cost us.
And I think we're doing that now, and based upon what Gaston indicated is that, yes, I would say, but a year and a half ago, especially with original HMGP programs, there were a large number of our change orders, especially with the unforeseen conditions. But we are controlling our costs. A lot of it is doing a little bit more homework up front. Now, the C7, C8 project that Gaston indicated, it's, I would say, almost like an anomaly and an outlier. one of the things you're dealing with is an aging infrastructure, especially when you get to 60 to 70 years old, and then some of the limited capacity you have on the resources you have. And then the other, it was really not that convenient to try and get as much information you can on the water flow because, again, it's underneath the foundation and you really just didn't know. So we did estimate a certain amount of flow on that C7, C8, but the amount that was encountered in the field was more than we expected. So again, C7 is one. The sewer pump station A, that was one of them that came up of the unforeseen conditions with the structure. And then part of that is, again, you're dealing with a structure of 80 to 100 years old. And once you dig into it, you just don't know. But to answer your question, Dr. Duplessis, is that we are, every avenue we can to improve our processes on the front end design, we take advantage of that.
Are we recording new conditions? I mean, as we dig things up, are we recording the new conditions?
Absolutely.
As built in, yes.
Right.
Okay.
I'll tell you, Judge, this is, I don't believe this, but I've had people say to me on more than one occasion, but the vendors bid this and then they just get change orders and so they make more money on the end of it. And I see right there, change requested by vendor. So so I guess, what do we do to prevent a vendor from bidding $100 when he knows that it's going to be, she knows it's going to be $200 and submitting change orders? I think our oversight view is, want to make sure there's nothing going on untoward here or just flat out fraudulent.
Yeah.
And so,
That's a
how do we know that?
great question, and from experience, I can tell you that can only happen if a contractor knows something that we don't, which is hardly is the case, but I've seen it and I've encountered myself. I've been a victim of that, where if a contractor did their own takeoff of a project that we've designed and estimated, provided quantities, and they pick up on the fact that we may have underestimated a quantity, for example, by mistake. They're not going to bring that up to your attention. What they're going to do is they're going to bid that number low because that's going to help their cause and their bottom line. And then when the project actually happens, just organically, the quantity is going to prove itself higher, and they're gonna obviously make a lot more money, right? Whether through a change order or just through the process of having actual quantities versus estimated. They can also look at ways, of like, oh, I see they missed something here. There's a conflict. I know for a fact that's gonna create and then they would be quiet about it. And then, sure enough, if they are the lowest bidder, they're gonna anticipate it. And it's not necessarily good or bad. It's unfortunate, right? So the cleanest design we can provide, the better off we are, because it takes an opportunity away from contractor to play a game that they might play.
So the idea of intentionally bidding something below what your competitors are going to bid it, because it's a loser or whatever, with the idea that I'll get change orders approved in the future, if they haven't found something erroneous in our request, that can't happen.
That is correct, unless there's a change of condition that no one knew or anticipated, that would legitimately create additional, require more work, more time and material.
So suppose that is the case. They find out that there's a pipe.
Yeah.
And they can't dig in that place or something that I could think of.
Yeah.
Simple. How do we know that the change order is bid at what I would call the same margin as the rest of the deal was bid at? Or so how do we know that this change order is worth $5,000, but they say it's a $10,000 change
Great example,
order?
and let me answer it this way, and I'll let Chris or Ron.
You see what I'm getting at? We want
No, that's awesome.
For us, we're not engineers to know, well, some of us.
So if you look at that slide, and we anticipated that, obviously. So a change order, in this case, requested by a vendor, but sometimes it's initiated by us, or just organically or neutrally, it was created because of some condition. So it's as legitimate as anything. That request comes to a Chris or one of his colleagues, and he takes pride in how he negotiates that. There's an independent estimate associated with that additional work. Often he denies it, brings it down. If it starts at 200, ends up at 100, you don't see that, you see the 100. So maybe we can share with you once in a while what the original request was. So that is where we use our knowledge, our standard costing and independent cost estimate to true up the ask. And in the past, if you cannot agree, and upfront you do time and material, and where, okay, let's just watch what you do, how much money, how much time and material you're gonna spend, and we'll pay you according with some profit, agreed to profit.
And we have those
So-
controls in place to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so there's standard gauges that we use to allow us to, we know we're in this.
Yeah, I don't mean to be
Yeah.
insulting, but
No, not
our
insulting
job
at
is to
all.
try and make sure that things.
No, this is
This
helpful.
this is one of the things that we've learned through this process,
Yeah.
it does make you a lot more comfortable to
Yeah.
know this.
Yeah, because, exactly.
Yeah, no, I love the question because that's allowing us to bring more clarity to the process, and we're very confident that what we're doing is the right thing.
I don't think bad things
you
are
know.
happening. I just want to be able to explain to somebody, how do you know the vendors don't low bid you and then jack it up? I said, well, because they told me how it works, and I know that now.
No, and then what Ghassan said, and this is a very good slide to be at. I know
It
that
is.
Chris chime in a little bit, but if you take a look at that second step, to change, evaluate, negotiate it, sometimes that takes weeks, sometimes it may take 2-3 months. And back and forth, we do a very good job of vetting and scrutinizing the contractor submittal. And as Ghassan indicated, that independent estimate, we also do an independent estimate. So that is really one of the longest steps in that process of just getting past that stage of evaluation, negotiation with the contractor to make sure the change order is legitimate, number one, and the cost is an adequate cost. I just want to mention that.
Right, so one of the key steps in this process is bringing the change order before you even see it to an internal body that we created. I'm gonna come back to the slide. What we created about in 2019, collectively, we agreed that, we had been facing after the fact costs that would come to the CFO and say, oh, guess what, we have a change order that's $200,000, we need money to pay it, where the CFO had no knowledge of that. So we created this, again, self imposed, I guess, process that includes all the pertinent departments that would be put in the front part of the process, so they're all aware, they can all weigh in, make sure everything is legitimate, everything is questioned and challenged, and more importantly, that the CFO and the budget office is well aware of this incoming cost that was not budgeted for, so they can do some maneuvering and find money from somewhere else to fund that, because it's legitimate, and something else has to. It's not like we create more money, add to the budget. We just try to stay within the budgeted amount, and then just find money that take away, I guess, money from something else.
It was also a result of the working group that many of you former board members from the finance team were actually on. And so many of the documents that we now use that we bring to the board for approval in the finance committee and board committee, as well as the change order forms, were actually, you all had input through that working group.
Yeah. So this process has served us very well as designed. Again, from Gray's perspective, he's sitting in the room watching this, right, and then weighing in and adjusting and preparing himself for that additional cost. So very, very good. Again, it happened kind of organically and was a team effort to create that process. So that happens, and then once we're comfortable, yes, sir.
I just want a copy of that, that's all.
That we can send you a copy of the whole presentation, absolutely. That's when we come to you. No, I'm sorry. Then it goes to the GSO as, okay, it's been vetted. Then it goes through the process of going to committee, finance committee, and then the board of directors, and then then it's official. That's why contractors and consultants wait very patiently for your action, because they know we can't act and we can't pay them until that action is taking place. So I'm going to pass the presentation to Chris to share his perspective and what he knows.
Okay, so I think the question came up of what does the board of directors see? And in 2021, there was a resolution passed that gave these levels of authority to the executive director position. So everything under $1 million and any changes that still keep the project under $1 million is approved at the executive director level. And those, we had created a form for his signature, and those should be put in your board packet. I know the packet's long, so it's probably buried in there, but those are eventually put in the board packet. It's once we get over $1 million threshold is where it gets a little more complicated, is that basically between 1 and 5 million under the first $250,000 or 20% of the contract, whichever's less. That's up to the executive director's level. Once you reach past that threshold, every change order has to be approved by the board of directors.
Mm-hmm.
So a $5 change order has to come to this board for approval if it's over $250,000 in that instance. And the same thing over $5 million. It's the way the math works out, it's $500,000. That is the threshold for any project over $5 million. So anything under $500,000 would go to the executive director's signature, and then everything after that. So we haven't seen it that much since it's a relatively new resolution, but you may end up seeing these resolutions where the first whereas or second whereas says, whereas under executive director approval,
Mm-hmm.
it was approved by this date, and then it comes to this board.
For ratification.
No, that would be for change order 2. So if change order 1 brought the contract up to, let's call it $5.4 million, Ghassan has the authority to approve that, and then the next change order brings it over 5.5 million. We would bring that second change order to the board, which recognizes the change order 1 was approved with that authority level. So I went through last year's board packets and kind of tabulated up everything that the board had approved under the general superintendent's report. And some of these numbers did surprise me. For context, we have probably around 100 projects at this level constantly revolving. So we awarded 19 contracts, had 7 renewals, 14 acceptances, and then I separate out the JIR contract amendments since we've already established that those are a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And then 16 contract amendments for professional services that were separate from the JIR, and 30 change orders for our major construction contracts. Mm-hmm. So when you get underneath that threshold, we did 24 executive director level approvals. Mm-hmm. So it's not that much information, but those numbers did surprise me, especially the change orders. I thought those were going to be higher than 30 done in a calendar year, given the number of projects that we have out.
They seem to have gone down, Chris, since I've been on the.
It does feel like it's done it.
And part of that is
Absolutely has.
part of that is fewer contracts being put out on our side, so fewer volume of contracts. We used to have a lot of projects between $1 and $3 million. We've kind of shifted that to that much larger one between the West Power Complex.
And we raised the threshold for what Ghassan has the ability to approve.
Right, so
that
24
has also contributed to
That's
board
correct.
seeing less.
That's correct.
The 24 changes would have come to the board last year. Mm-hmm. I think some of those were professional services, so that same threshold counts towards the professional services as well. I think they're about identical, but I didn't want to unload a bunch of information.
And I think, Yolanda Ghassan mentioned earlier, this is, the result of the involvement from some of the board members early on in the change order process. And it's especially with the executive director level, up to $1 million, and those other thresholds made a big difference because, there were some comments I received with a $10 change order, a $5 change order, and the improvements definitely paid off, especially at the executive director's level. So that's one, you see those numbers go down, and as Chris indicated, is that we are shifting, a lot of the contracts we had earlier on were heavily FEMA funded. So we've completed that work, we were onto our system funds, and then it's also an improvement that we've actually improved upon and made it more efficient and productive by change order process.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that we meet every Thursday, weekly on this CMRC, so it's a good process. And I asked the project manager, engineers directly about sort of that step about how they evaluated and challenged on the front end. So that's what gives me a little comfort on the budgetary impact is, what have we done to potentially head off the change from the contractor? That would be obviously our preferred resolution there.
Chris, on the JIRRs, we were getting these requests where someone was having the territory expanded.
That's right.
So was that because they're already on an approved list and it's a fixed cost? What justified us doing that?
Yes, I can answer. And what, as Chris indicated earlier, the JR contract amendments, they are quite different from the normal professional service contracts we do with SWBNO. Again, the JRR professional services consultants, they work directly for SWBNO, Sewage and Water Board, correct myself. But we follow the lead of DPW. And those, our sewer and water systems that we've designed earlier on, we're following these neighborhoods. So when DPW changes any scope of work in that neighborhood or shifts some of the neighborhood projects around the RR, we have to follow that lead because we have to make adjustments to our utilities associated with those neighborhoods. And that's why you see so many earlier on the JIR amendments, because if DPW makes a tweak in the neighborhood, makes it add a street or deduct a street, we have to follow suit with that.
So the alternative to that is obviously find somebody else to do that additional work, which typically does not make sense. So
That's correct.
way back when, each area got its own consultant that was selected for that. And they became the engineer of record, the most familiar with the area. So if you add a water main or 1 or 2 blocks to that area, it doesn't make sense to bring somebody else. They're there. And so that's why that volume of their work grows within that region.
That's correct.
And you will see those contracts on the board agendas as water line replacement contracts, just for everyone's knowledge.
That's right.
Next.
Okay.
So, and then as a follow-up, I took a sample of 3 changes that were in 2022, just to give a little more context, just kind of follow up on them. So all this was explained at the time. The first one was the water hammer program design, and I know it looks pretty glaring when you see an original contract amount of $2.5 million, and it is now up to $11.3 million. And our amendments and our professional services contracts do work a little bit differently than change orders. So when you add those % of change orders to the original contract amount, sometimes they don't make all the sense as if a change order, because for a construction contract, you're expecting to have laid out everything for the contractor to do, and unless you were missing something that you didn't have, that's when the change order comes in place. Professional services may not work that way. For example, in the water hammer program design, the original FEMA scope of work was completely different than it was today. At the time when FEMA first proposed it to us and we got Stanley Consultants involved, there was no water towers in that project at all. It was after an analysis done with the surge analysis that the water towers became the primary function of the water hammer mitigation part of it, and that's what changed that scope. Additionally, that $2.5 million was just for the design of what was originally 8 pumps and those replacements. And then in there it wrote that if we wanted to, if the board elected to do so, we could add construction management and construction services to that, which is what we did, but we also did it at phases at a time. So we initially chose for phase 1, the water towers, to give that work to that company and then evaluate them on that. And if it was good enough, then we could then look at phases 2 and 3 for them, which is what we ended up doing. And then there's levels of effort on that. So specific tasks given to these consultants, and that if we then need more support for them, that's when these additional changes have to come. And especially in this instance from last year is we added some additional construction management support for phases 2 and 3 to really help us get the best product we could after some challenges early in phase 2 for construction. The second item on this list is a transmission main.
No, I mean, it's such an expansion of scope. It's to me, again, change order doesn't, but would you call that a contract amendment? Is that what you call
That's
it?
amendment. This is for consulting services, yes. Because, so people do ask this question is, at what point could we have cut that contract in half and solicit it out. Well, if you recall from earlier, professional services have to be done on qualifications.
You don't have to solicit, it just,
So we have to solicit it out. If we did an RFQ for companies and they put in their submissions and one company can say, well, we designed the project for the first 2/3 of it, that inherently gives them an advantage on the scoring for the last part, especially if they did a good job. If they did a poor job, then that changes the dynamic, which
my
may
issue,
be the
my
reason.
issue is just semantic. I mean, to me, it's amendments, it's not changes, and it's amendment descriptions.
That is, yeah, it's a generic term up
Yeah,
there.
and so I'm gonna stop talking about it.
And again, the change order is really relative to the second item Chris is about, because
Right.
that's the actual construction contract itself.
So, yes, so 2150 was a transmission main replacement. So this is one of those contracts that we, for lack of a better term, we put another pipe inside one of the main transmission mains to basically replace it instead of digging up the whole thing. So at different parts of it, you dig a large trench and you put the machine in to actually feed the pipe through. The original thought was you dig up the street, you do that, you put the street back, you put the asphalt back in most cases. But if the city, in this case, decides they want to do a full reconstruction of that block, that forces our hand to then replace the smaller water lines and the sewer lines underneath that. And then that ends up being a change order, because that wasn't necessarily planned originally, but our hand was forced by what
That
the
is a
city
change.
does.
But it's
That
a
is a
right- but
change
That is
it's
a
order.
change order, I get that,
It's a
yeah.
change, but it's for the right reasons.
Yeah,
and it's right.
It is. It gives us the best product in the end, and it doesn't necessarily fall under that unforeseen conditions
Right.
category.
Unexpected.
This is more of a request. This is an outside agency asking us to do things, which we will do.
Right, and one comment on that, on this 2150, that's with SWBNO working collaboratively with DPW, because they had, in one of their RR projects, actually intersected this project, 2150. So that's where the collaborative effort came in, especially with intersections, and then we worked together to actually upgrade it, the entire street in conjunction with their neighborhood, so we can have a better product.
And that's a good thing.
That's
the
correct.
type of collaboration we want to see from
That's
this
correct.
organization, so.
Okay.
And then the last one on the list is another amendment. This is the professional services amendment. This is was for specifically the design and construction of 2 static frequency changers for the power complex. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Originally, it was for 1 static frequency changer and how to get it to our existing center of control. So the original this follows up the same thing. The $634,000 we originally proposed with Jacobs was a phase 1 scope. At the time, all we knew was we wanted a static frequency changer, and we didn't know where it was going to go.
That's correct.
We had no idea the location that was best for us. We had an idea that it may go, which is now the power complex, but that idea ended up having to grow a lot more, especially having to add the utility rack at the scale it is now. At the time, it was going to be much smaller. Adding 2 more, which is this specific change, was adding the 2 that the city funded. So we have to add commissioning, design. There's a lot more underneath that besides just saying, hey, I want to duplicate this spec twice for another static frequency changer. We have to design foundations and all the duct banks and everything to tie that together, and then future-proof that with the more electrical systems later on. So this is another example of how we end up with these types of situations.
Yeah,
That $634,000 was never going to be the final number, and we knew that, and Jacobs knew that at the start, and it was written in their contract that way.
right. I just want to comment on, and because this is another unique professional services contract. Part of it is such that a large portion of the cost was a direct correlation of the funding we got from the city. And again, at the time, you know, as Chris alluded to at the beginning, there was no anticipation or thought that there would be funding for 2 additional static frequency converters. So again, in that process, that's where the change would come, where if the city say, here's an additional $22 million to buy the equipment, then that support side that's needed to support that equipment, that's where this came. And again, the West Power Complex is a unique program in itself, but that's how, one, to be efficient, stay on schedule, and I just really wanted to mention, it's a function of the financing at which it comes in over time. And then we'd have to make that adjustment to add the design services associated with that and the future construction inspection, yes.
I guess kind of, this is my ignorance, and I'm sorry, but if the first static change order was gonna be 634,000,
Design,
if the design was gonna be 634,000, how come the design for the last two is so much more expensive on a pro rata basis?
I was like, you know, looking at you like exactly know what the question was gonna be, to be honest with you. So initially, if you remember, we had T6 that's available and it had 60 hertz power, right? And it was not useful for us when we needed for the 25 hertz. So our focus was we need a frequency changer to make T6 available. Just to want to put that in there, why did we start with one and end up with three? Because scope. Had we not got the two additional, this 634 would have been a much higher number, but maybe not close to the 7, but it would have been a higher number because it would have evolved to how does it connect, the footing, the foundation. It would have, the project itself would have grown anyway, but not to the extent that you're seeing now. So it's not 634 times 3
That's correct.
instead of
Okay,
1.
Because if we know the project is going to grow in X way, why isn't that part of the original scope? That's what I'm trying
because we
to
don't have
understand.
the money, right?
Yeah,
No,
We
it was
can't-
in,
we
it
can't
was
do
in
both
the
without
original
the money.
scope,
but the pricing
but
was.
we don't know what that final dollar. So when you ask an engineer to design something, I can't say, oh, it's going to take me 100 hours because
It's gonna
if you
cost
gave
$10,
if you gave me a piece of paper that said you're going to design, let's just go back to a kitchen, a house. You're going to build me a 2-story house. Well, without the additional details of what's in that house, I can't tell you how long it's going to take me to design it. Once I get into the details and I start doing a consultation with you, that's when I know exactly what you want out of this building. And that's kind of how we do our contracts with this. It's an original scope, just to build out this consult. So they can come in, get all of our engineering drawings, get everything we have, and say, this is what you really do need. And then let's expand that scope to fill in those gaps. And in this case, so I understand the thought process that it should be theoretically 3 times as much as the original one for 2 additional ones, but for professional services, you have to look at it more like time than actual construction. Because we're not getting all 3 of our static frequency changers at the same time, because Siemens cannot deliver it that way, this now spreads out our actual schedule by years and months, because we're just not going to get it at the same time. So
Well, just the connectivity alone, that scope of that, figuring how the 3 will not only connect each, but connect to the rest of it, is something was not contemplated, but was not costed out initially.
So how can we make sure that we're communicating to the team that's gonna be looking at this? Like, in some instances, and this will never be the case for everything, in some instances, this is a smaller scope, and the idea is that there'll be a second part. So how do we communicate those expectations so the team that's reviewing aren't sticker shocked
Right.
on our end when you
try
know
to do
full
this in our
well
resolution,
that that's
and
maybe
for
the case
this
later
We
one,
on?
actually put it in, it's
It is in
actually,
this
it
resolution.
actually listed in the resolution, as you said. We actually list phase 1, 2, and 3. And also in one of the whereases with phases 2 and 3 is that phase 2 and 3 is not fully funded. There is future funding to be anticipated to do phase 2 and 3. And so that's actually in a resolution, and is in one that's coming up tomorrow. So, but again, the West Power Complex, that's why I said earlier, it is unique in itself. It's not a typical professional service contract.
Yeah.
And then because with the phases, we're at phase 2 now in the West Power Complex. We still don't have that potential funding in place for phase 3. So again, because of the timeline and the schedule, and also working with Entergy and the substation, we're actually sort of incrementally building this West Power Complex and bringing it online as an interim function until we get all phases in. So again, funding is a large component of it, because from the beginning, we did not have the full funding for the entire complex that we know about right now. And that's one of the parameters.
And to-
Yep, go ahead.
We can't contract unfunded things, right?
That is correct. We wait until the funding is in
Out
place,
of the cash, you can't do the contract.
and then that's when we come back and do an amendment.
That'd be fiscally irresponsible,
We have to wait.
illegal.
And to,
That's right.
Illegal, I mean, to just
Well, that's
commit,
what I meant by
commit,
can't.
yeah.
and to follow up on a point you made earlier, Poco,
Not
is
chance, not chance, can't.
we did make a point in, I think it was in 2022, we put an RFQ out for the rest of the power complex.
That's correct.
For that design. So we are not giving the entirety of the West Power Complex
That's correct.
to Jacobs based on this, because there was another RFQ that another company did win, Power Engineers, to do the operation center and a lot of the foundations for.
There was a common sense decision
correct.
and there was a line that allowed us to do that, right?
Right.
And then there was an instance, I think this is very important, an instance we actually bid out the work and we only had one proposal.
That's correct.
That was this
That was this one.
this one for the static frequency changer. That was only
That's correct.
one response to the RFQ.
And that's how it grows within that same,
How big is static frequency change? Huge.
how big the size you mean?
Fitness area?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not.
It might fit in this room.
Okay.
I'd like to see that.
So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but the JRR, those projects are, and the construction is all handled by DPW, and those changes are initiated by the city of New Orleans. So when it comes to the amendments, those are generally as responses to the changes that the city has made and initiated. The original group of design firms was engaged well, I don't remember what year that was, 2011 or 12?
Yeah, the original JIRR, well, prior to JIRR, the engineering firms worked directly for SWBNO because prior to the settlement, we actually designed the rehab for sewer and water, and we went and did our own contracts like we normally do. Once the settlement came through, it was in the board's advantage to piggyback with DPW because that's less paving we'd have to pay. But again, as what Chris indicated, we had those consultants, but we are, the lead agency is the Department of Public Works, and we follow their lead. Okay?
And so, it is 105 projects, there were 202 plan changes, leading to $24.5 million to the Sewage and Water Board. And then the final steps and challenges that we do see, we're always trying to make these change procedures a little more thorough and,
That's scary.
and transparent for those changes. One of the challenges that we do see is personnel. These large projects, the one in the picture was my project, and I have myself and one other engineer working with me trying to manage this, which is why we have so many consultants. It's more than one or two people can handle. Same thing with the West Power Complex. There's 3 staff members working on that on full time, with the support of management. So these are over $100 million in the case of Power Complex, $250 million, where we only have a couple staff members, which is it exasperates the need for additional staffing on our end. And then, especially lately, is the high uncertainty for estimates. We hear it all the time in our internal conversations that some things it's really difficult. It's very challenging where we go into a bid expecting an amount, and I know in one case last year there was a project where it came in double the estimate. More recently, our foundations for our West Power Complex came in $7 million under budget. It's a big range that we're working with market instability, and the electrical side of thing is proving more challenging than a lot of it as well, especially with lead times and getting these products in time is when we're specifically talking about the power complex. Yes, ma'am.
Have you tried reaching out or subcontracting to local DBEs in the area? There are a lot of DBEs that are interested in getting and doing and participating on these projects.
That's actually part of, we have a DVE percentage participation as part of all of our contracts. And then
How I guess, how is that being achieved? I mean, I know everybody has a percentage, but I guess like how is that being?
By hiring actual.
Yeah, like
DBE contractors.
hiring actual like and local DBEs.
So our contractors are achieving that percentage by hiring DBEs and make them part of projects. So we have been successful unequivocally meeting those 35% on just every project that we've done. So we have maximized or optimized that relationship. So we're
Well, I guess
serving
in
the
terms
purpose.
of he's saying that they're kind of short
I
on
was
the.
talking about internally managing.
Yeah.
Managing these projects.
In-house.
There aren't enough Chris's
The technical
to
staff.
manage our
Okay.
projects.
The technical staff.
Yeah.
That's correct. But also to answer your question, that we do have
I answered.
EDBP, the Economic Disadvantaged Business Program Department at SWBNO, and contractors are required every month to submit their reports for their review. That's correct. I just wanted to read that in. Okay. One thing I would say that the first point, that market instability, probably 18 months or 2 years ago, it was literally unstable. We had material prices that were through the roof. And what Chris has indicated that on some of our contracts, we did not anticipate the bid submitted to be 50% to 100% over the engineer's estimate. So it was literally high. We see some stability coming to the market right now, which is very good. And the last contract at 1415 was really, I would say, eye-opening to the engineering staff because it was 6 to 7 million under the engineer's estimate. And we hope as we move further, it stabilizes more so we can use that additional savings to other projects.
Don't tell the contractors they come in low.
I don't think it actually. Final slide. I don't think there is.
That's the last slide.
Discussion, or we?
I think it's been excellent. I really think it's been very, very illuminating and gives me great comfort. And the idea that we put as much effort into a change order as we did into the original scrutiny that goes into it is all there. Not that I would have expected anything less, in all seriousness, but I think it's.
And it was a great PowerPoint, very clear,
Yeah,
whoever prepared them.
The process is obviously well thought out, very well executed, and I'm delighted about that.
Yep. Good work, guys. Thank you very much.
Do we have any public comment?
No public comment, Chair.
Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Okay.
moved.
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
I feel a lot